I think if I had to pick, though, I think I'd take Bama on the over this year. I like what they have back. I like the continuity. And I think you might be kind of getting in on an underrated Alabama team going into the season, which is rare. That's seldom the case for the Crimson Tide. Hello and welcome. It's always college football. Today is Monday, May 19th, and we hope you're enjoying the show wherever you consume the show, whether it's on the podcast platform, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. If you're here with us via the ESPN College Football YouTube channel, we very much appreciate you being with us here in May. It's kind of the slow season in college football, but we are about to ramp things up. We're just a month and a half away from media days getting underway. Big 12 will kick us off there at the beginning of July. The SEC will quickly follow. So there's a lot to look forward to here in the next couple months. I'm really excited about our conversation today. We're going to be joined by the head coach of the Crimson Tide, Kalen DeBoer. We'll talk a little bit about the quarterback competition that is ongoing there in Tuscaloosa, what year two looks like, the return of Ryan Grubb, and how they can continue to progress on the defensive side and play as well as they did down the stretch all the way throughout this upcoming season. So we can't wait for our visit with head coach Kalen DeBoer. We also are going to dive into some second-year coaches throughout the Power Four. We'll look at some win totals, who's expected to make great progress, and who has a tough schedule. We're going to kind of go through line by line, and we'll categorize wins, losses, and toss-ups for a lot of these second-year coaches and just how things might look for them as we fast forward here to the season. So without much further ado, let's dive into a great conversation with the head coach of the Crimson Tide, Kalen DeBoer. Well, always happy to be joined by one of my favorite people in the sport. I think he's one of the best coaches in America, and I'm excited to see what he does in year two at Alabama. He's Kalen DeBoer. Coach, thanks so much for the time, my friend. How are you?
I'm great. Great to be here with you, Greg. Hope you're doing well, man. Just saw you a few days ago. So.
In a very uncomfortable setting, I might add. We played in a golf tournament. For those that are unaware, there's a golf tournament here in Birmingham. All the coaches come in. Coach DeBoer's there. Trent Dilfer's there. Kirby Smart's there. Coach Saban's there. There's a bunch of guys there. Coach, I don't know about you. I hope that our conversation goes a little better than our golf game that day, but we'll give it our best shot, huh?
Yeah, this is a little bit more our element. So
I'm much more comfortable talking football than I am pulling the club. That's for sure. We'll kind of start by recapping last year. And I've said this countless times throughout the offseason. I think it's very easy in year number one to focus on what could have been, what was, all this other stuff. I've chosen to kind of focus on the turnover going into last year, a new voice for the first time in nearly 2 decades, and the high points of last year. So when you kind of chronicle that year one, what kind of perspective have you gained from that experience?
Well, I think that's the big thing, is that now we have experiences that we've all shared, or most of us. There's new players coming in. There's very little staff turnover, but there's always going to be something, and we have these experiences now that we've shared, the good experiences, the experiences that didn't go as planned, that you have to learn from. And that helps us grow. We really dissect everything. You always are trying to prepare, right? Whether it's game management type things, situations. And that's what you do as a football coach. You think about all those things, and the ones that you're going to have more often, obviously you practice them more, and you try to cover the ones that might be once every 2 or 3 seasons. But there's still those feelings and how you're going to handle it. And you talk it through, and I try to bring up examples of maybe what the guys in 2023 went through. I try to reflect on a time or two there. But when you didn't go through it together, it just isn't the same. And now we've been through it together. So we've been, I think, very thorough going back to even the winter phase of conditioning and meeting time to go through all the different things, the critical situations we were in, the turnovers we forced, the turnovers we lost, penalties both ways, other situations other teams had that maybe apply to us, and ones we almost were in. There's just also another level of relationships that we have now as a coaching staff together, but also a coaching staff with our players.
I feel like, Coach, you really are, and just knowing you personally now for a number of years, I feel like you, as much as anybody, are able to really connect with the player. I think that was exemplified by how many guys stayed how many guys, even after one spring last year, said, yeah, you know what, I want to play for this guy. And I feel like that relationship has gotten deeper. And as a result, you can ask more of the players. Now, I know it's always with good intentions, but when you have that credibility established with the players, are you able to ask more of them? How does that work?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I think it naturally happens because you try to really put yourself in those adverse situations as often as you can. But because then a game comes along, it's going to happen, and you got to be able to trust. And I think that's the key word is trust that what you're saying or what they're, when I'm telling a player or our coaches are telling a player that they know it's for our good, not just because you're upset or anything like that. And that, the real intentions are to help them be the best they can be, bring value to who they are, football player as a person, and that it's nothing about them personally. It's about what we're trying to do together to help everyone reach the goals that they have individually and we have collectively. And so, just more time together. And we are very intentional with how we spend that time together in building our culture, having the expectations, but most importantly, just growing the relationships that have that, again, trust that we all want the same thing. And we all are here for a reason. We all stayed here for a reason, chose here to be here for a reason, and that's to do great things at Alabama.
Yeah, it certainly feels like the continuity, and you just listen to the players. There's just a deeper understanding of culturally what it's going to be like, and it's different than the previous staff. But I think that's great. You got to be you, and I think that's encouraging. You bring in Ryan Grubb, I think it's funny when I've talked to Ryan Grubb, and this was, dating back to the Washington days. He goes, "Yeah, I'm the bad cop to Kalen's good cop," and I think that's kind of amazing that you guys are able to complete each other. You've worked together so long, you're able to kind of complete each other's sentences, and hey, you can be there to love them up, and he can be there to rip them apart, and vice versa. I think that's a tremendous balance that can be created offensively. So, with the addition of Coach Grubb, what does your offense now have that maybe it lacked a year ago?
Well, yeah, I think there is a balance. I think that's a great word to use that I take into consideration with all my coaches because every guy coaches different. And, I might try to offset the balance with some position groups, but obviously there's got to be a balance of what we're trying to do when it comes to, who you are truly as a coach, how you operate. And, when you talk about completing each other's sentences, I've had times where, a few years ago, I can remember a specific situation where I pulled a player over to me and I said something to him, and his position coach, who I also had been with for a while, had been with this player for both conversations with me, and I didn't see the conversation he had with Coach Grubb. And we said the exact same thing, almost the exact same way, and I didn't know he had already hit on it, but I think that's just, when you're together long enough, you've had so many conversations, you've been in so many situations together. It doesn't mean that you don't change. You got to keep evolving. It doesn't mean that you always feel like you got the same exact feeling. I mean, every play caller is going to call games differently, whether it's how I would have done it. That doesn't mean that's how, Ryan Grubb's going to do it. It falls in line with the parameters of how we want to manage a game, what we feel are the key plays. We lay out a game plan, and I see that, but, it doesn't mean it's always the same because you have your own personality, you have your own vibe, you have your own rhythm. And I think that's what play callers do. I didn't want that and someone beating me over the head because I had a plan laid out for that next drive when I was calling plays. And so in between series, I think is that time, hey, what do you got? Or you lay out what you feel is important. And then, obviously there's the big third down, fourth down calls that, when you do get that little break, maybe it's a TV timeout or something like that, or a review, you get a chance a little bit more to talk about it, but there's stall tactics sometimes you can use, at times to have a little longer conversation. We use that in big moments, to help us make sure we are exactly on the same page. But, there's a trust you have. And that's really what, I think you asked what he brings and how we move forward. There's a trust that I have with him, but there's also some continuity that he has with other coaches on our staff, with Nick Sheridan. And I know that's been helpful for Ryan to speed up his process of getting to know our personnel. The why, why did we do this? Why did we do that a year ago when you're reviewing the film? And then also Jamarcus Shepard, it's just, that's an integral kind of threesome right there that have been together for a few years and, speak the same language as well.
Yeah, it's a great group, and Coach Shepard does an amazing job. And Nick, I think, did a good job last year. And if you look at the personnel last year, you're going to naturally call it and kind of gravitate towards what your quarterback's comfortable with. And we know that Jalen McElroy was super dynamic with the ball in his hands. Quarterback run was a heavy part of what you guys wanted to be, especially in red zone and in short yardage situations. Now, looking at the quarterback situation with Ty Simpson, Austin Mack, and or Keelan Russell, depending on who emerges from that three-way quarterback battle, I can't imagine quarterback run being utilized as much as it was utilized a year ago. So how much will the offense evolve based around the quarterback's skill set and comfort level?
Yeah, no. And I think all three quarterbacks we have do have the ability to extend plays, that I'm speaking your language, quarterback, what they're doing as far as moving the chains, using their legs to keep plays alive. And Austin Mack, even as big as he is, once he gets moving, he covers a lot of ground. And Ty was a great dual threat, and Keelan has the same abilities to make people miss, and probably faster than most people think. But I think we are more similar as a group, as you mentioned, I think in your own words, than maybe the diversity of who we had as far as skill sets and how different they were. And how you wanted to use it. Jalen, as far as, explosiveness, I don't know if I've ever seen anything like it with a quarterback that could use his legs or had that luxury in that fashion. And you have to make sure you're utilizing the skill sets of your players. Jalen certainly had like I refer to it as a superpower that we had to make sure we had incorporated into our plan.
Yeah, he was dynamic for sure. The quarterback competition, I know right now you have three guys all are repping at the position, trying to figure out, all right, how do we want to maybe cut it down to two or what have you. But what do you want to see from your quarterback? What is the most important aspect of securing that spot and being your starter here in year number 2?
Yeah, I think just continued growth. They're all on the right track. They're all super invested, as you would expect. And they're all just, again, I talked about a healthy competition and who they are as people. They are finding their ways to lead in their own way, because that's probably the hardest thing when you have a quarterback battle. You want them not to step on each other's toes, but they also need to kind of take it and run with it when they have their opportunities, and they need to speak up. That's when you really find out, who are the guys that the rest of the team, follows along with, not just the plays on the field, but who they are as leaders. So these guys are again, balancing the reps. Keelan started out lower, and as he really earned more and more reps, we gave him those, and they're all making those strides in their own ways. Ty taking the steps. And so I think I've mentioned many times, we're not where we need to be. And that might sound like a knock on those guys, but that's expected. Like, there's a progression, there's a process these guys got to be on. None of them have taken this overwhelming number of college snaps, especially in a game, much less, with the ones on the practice field. So we're trying to, keep them moving, speed up the process for all of them, while we're also balancing the reps that each of them are getting. And, they're earning those reps. And I really appreciate the way they've handled it, and trying not to press too much is the thing for them. I think the pressure of fighting for a quarterback job is probably as stressful as anything they're going to go through. And, there's moments in a game when, 100,000 people are screaming. That's pretty stressful, but what they're doing, trying to win that job, that's managing some level of stress too. And they got to perform under those own conditions. And I think that's one of the adverse situations that you actually put these guys in before they step on the football field game one, that actually can help them.
Yeah, and I think it's great to have a three-way quarterback battle, and every rep is counted and it's meaningful. And Like, I think it's the way to do it. Perfect world. Do you have like a day where you'd like to have it decided? Is granted they got to go earn it, they got to go take it. I understand that, but in your mindset as a coach for the last 20 some odd years, is there a time frame where it's like, all right, guys, we got to decide?
hmm There's been roughly a similar kind of time frame throughout fall camp, and the last week and a half. I mean, we usually have a little bit longer of a phase of game. We call them bonus practices leading up to week one. And there's a weekend before, and then a few days before that. That's kind of when you really, for sure, like to have the starter named and him be able to start really being in sync with his receiving core, gelling that way, and really dialing on the reps. But if you feel like you're at that point earlier, it's been a few practices earlier, maybe a week earlier at some point. I've had a lot of these, kind of competitions over the years. As you mentioned, we do it for 25 years, probably. I don't know if it's 3, 4, 5, but there's been a handful of competitions to some level, whether it's 2 guys, 3 guys, a guy coming in that's a transfer, all that. You really got to be thorough. I think, in the end, it's who can move the ball down the field. People sometimes get caught up into who's grading out, who had the best, completion percentage, all those things. Those are all important, right? But I think in the end, it's who's moving the ball down the field for, the ones, the twos, most consistently when you're here in practice each and every day.
And to me, and this is no disrespect to last year's group whatsoever, but I do feel like last year's receiving group. Look, Ryan was amazing, but let's be real. Ryan wasn't on campus a year ago today, which is insane that he did what he did, and played as well as he did. Jeremy Bernard had never been in a traditional, hey, give me the ball type of guy. He'd been a gadget guy and had been very effective in that role. But the other guys, they were kind of trying to figure out, all right, how do I fit in? It feels like with the addition of Isaiah Horton, with the progress that we're expecting from Ryan Williams, with Jeremy Bernard being a little more comfortable being a featured player, it feels like the supporting cast is just much better than it was a year ago for whoever takes the quarterback spot. Is that a fair assessment of how much that room has grown?
Yeah, I think that's a really accurate assessment. And some of it isn't their fault. It's just a matter of time that it takes to learn the system. And another year now, I just saw, and I knew this was going to happen. These guys were talking about it over a month ago. Many of them going and meeting at a location here in the month of May. And we've cautioned them not to do too much, because the summer is going to be as hard as one they've ever been through. But, just the ability to get together and them doing it on their own, and that desire to do it, and then also know what to work on, and like you said, Ryan wouldn't have known maybe other than a few little things, what those route concepts were. Germ knew it because he was part of the offense before, but he's still got to translate it to the other guys in the room. And then I think just the talent level, the consistencies. I mean, these guys aren't slotted into one position now. They can play multiple positions. They can move around. They can have really productive sessions, whether it's individually or 7-on-7s, just whatever workout they're in. Film room, together, talking through it. A lot of them are watching their one-on-one clips from the spring. Maybe even going back to last year, just talking through the details on where they expect the ball. There's a lot more of just the verbiage, the in sync, the details. I think is really what you get round 2 here, that you didn't have maybe a year ago.
Yeah, I would imagine that group collectively, I'm very encouraged and excited to see how the offense performs. Defensively, it's like, hey, let's rinse and repeat. Like, we did a lot of really good things down the stretch last year. And I think changing the system, man, I think people are like, oh, well, they just went from man to zone. Like, it's not that easy, And it's, by the way, there's a lot of man now too. But terminology, comfort level within the system, I think there was a bit of a learning curve there, and Coach Womack's group down the stretch really started to find themselves. But the one area that I'm going to be really curious about is the pass rush, and how do you create that pass rush this upcoming year, knowing there's so many new faces and guys that are expected to have increased roles from where they were a year ago.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think the man zone thing, it's never even how you planned. I know you can look at a coordinator's history and what he did, and Coach Womack, and kind of know that that's maybe the direction you want to go. But I remember specifically through much of the season, us talking about the percentages and it being way more man than probably what we originally thought going in. And a lot of that's the skill set of your players, but also some of that is just trying to maybe force the issue on some aggression, whether it's the pass rush, as you referred to, and us trying to manufacture that. I think there's some of that schematically, and then there's also a technical thing that comes into play as far as our guys. Just more experience when you think about LT and Jamarian Latham, and just go Quay Rusaw. You just keep going down the line. That's the some of the edge guys, and then they take that in the interior wise. And I think again, it always comes down to you got to win your one-on-one battle, but all of them working in sync, and us understanding the strengths of just the interior push that maybe a Tim Keenan can bring, and how best to utilize him. James Smith, a couple new faces in there. We don't have Tim anymore, but a lot of consistency, a lot of continuity to where we can tweak it. The number of calls, maybe, it isn't necessarily the call sheet, but it's how many times you call certain things. There's still got to be an aggression. That's how we're going to play when it comes to pressures and so forth, forcing the issues, the coverages that come along with it. I think a lot of it, though, comes down to just finishing a play. There's some guys that they got home and they got there, but they just got to get the quarterback on the ground and know where their help is at, as far as, the quarterback's going to move to this spot. They aren't going to be able to do that because they trust Tim Keenan's got that push inside, or James Smith, or any of these guys that we have interior wise. So collectively, they're just another, hopefully, level that we take this, that I think you saw. And again, consistently, the second half of the year, we played very sound and solid defense. Stayed away for the most part from the explosive plays. We were better on third down and fourth down than we were early in the season. Again, that was guys being comfortable, and I'm looking forward to taking those next steps with so much continuity returning.
A couple big picture questions, Coach, before we get you out of here. We appreciate your time today. Look, last year is kind of like drinking water through a fire hose, I would imagine, as this just a new frontier, and being at Alabama in the spotlight, and just the enormity of the role, and trying to learn the SEC, trying to learn your personnel, trying to make sure you can field a team with 46 guys that go in the portal. Like, I don't know how you did what you did last year, but now looking back and knowing into year number 2, how much better of a handle do you have on what you're going to see week in and week out playing against SEC competition?
Yeah, I think there's that for me, but then there's also the staff. There's some guys that were here that knew, but then I think it's just collectively, it's our staff knowing exactly what that schedule is going to look like for us week in and week out, how fall camp can be planned, and you can have meeting on meeting on meeting, but until you've gone through it, those details of them knowing to expect. I think one thing that's, we had really just 2 coaches that came with me. We talked about them earlier, Nick Sheridan and Jamarcus Shepard a year ago, that had been through a season. A lot of times I've been fortunate to have 7-8 coaches that move with you to a spot. They pretty much know, how we're going to operate when we see this type of defense or this type of offense, what camp and what each phase is going to look like. Those staff meetings right now are much easier to go through. We're still making the tweaks. It's not just always pick up and put down. We got to make sure we're always evolving and thinking about how we can make it better and how we got to adjust. But, that's been the pleasant piece about year 2. And obviously, the experiences that you just referred to being in the SEC, and we had played pretty much the same exact schedule, just flip-flopped home and away. And so, we have those experiences too. Obviously, those guys, who we are as well.
And finally, Coach, looking at just kind of the recruiting, I know we talked prior to the interview we talked briefly about all the guys that are coming in and how the calendar's changed. Well, a big question was, all right, he's never recruited the South. Like, all right, that to me is the most overblown. If you can talk to people, you can recruit anywhere. I thought that was a little overblown, but now understanding the landscape and recruiting to Alabama, I know that you had a great recruiting class last year, but I would imagine your expectations this year continue to attract top tier talent are as high as they've ever been. So in being able to create those relationships and that continuity with the 18-year-olds now that will be signing their letters of intent in a few months, how much further along are you than you were a year ago?
Yeah, I think they're, especially regionally down here in the Southeast, anywhere in the South, kind of in our recruiting territories, there's much more just familiarity. All that exists. There's the relationships have taken to the next level. I think, I got a good group, a good staff around me, whether it's on the field staff, off the field staff. I knew that coming in that had to be, again, balance would be the word I'd probably use of guys that I wanted, that I knew well, but also ones that we needed to have on staff that knew the Southeast and could help us hit the ground running. And I thought we did a good job last year. I think this year now it's just continuing to fill in the gaps. You're going to recruit across the board, every position, I think every single year. But now it's how do you continue to add, where are the areas where, okay, we know exactly what we're losing next year, who we might lose to the NFL, how we got to get better with the recruiting, who can play early in their career and help us, And so it's, I think, another level of just decision making. Also, the recruiting process. And I mean, it doesn't matter where you're at in the country. A lot of the same principles apply when it comes to recruiting. It's relationships. Obviously, there's an NIL factor these days. For every coach across the country, that has evolved. And the timeline of when we're recruiting and how it's sped up and how many more official visits we're going to have here in June is also a thing that didn't exist 2-3 years ago. At the level it is now. Wasn't that you weren't doing summer visits, but the number of how many that you're doing now is much different every weekend here through June. It's going to be locked and loaded on official visits, and what those schedules look like. I think we're much further along and on the same page, and feel like we got a good grasp of the guys that we're really attacking, and feel we have strong relationships with, who also feel good about us.
Well, that's terrific stuff, Coach. Really appreciate the time. Thank you so much for the visit, and we look forward to seeing what your team can do here in year number 2.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Craig. Appreciate you, man.
Let's dive into some second-year head coaches and what progress might look like from year 1 to year 2. Now, there were some remarkable examples last year in which some coaches had great success in year number 1. The best example being a guy that we had as a guest just a couple weeks ago, that was Curt Cignetti, who in year number 1 took Indiana from 3-9 to the college football playoff en route to an amazing 11-1 regular season record. Not everybody had seasons quite like that. Some coaches actually saw a significant regression. Arizona under Brent Brennan went from a team that was right there in double digits all the way down to a team that struggled to find any type of consistency last year. So we decided to kind of look at all the year 2 coaches in the Power 4 and take a peek at some win totals and what the general public anticipates for some of these coaches as they head into their second season. We'll start in the Southeastern Conference, which with our guest, Kalen DeBoer. Now, Alabama last year had what was, I think, a little bit of a disappointing 9-win campaign. Now, I think disappointing in the eyes of some, if you really look at it from the outside looking in, it would be easy to say for people, oh, yeah, hey, Bama should win double-digit games every year. They did for a long time under Saban, all this other stuff. And then you look at the amount of turnover that they experienced year over year and the amount of guys that were lost to the portal last year, and you look at some of the great moments. Last year's season, I think, in many ways was a success. Now, if you look at the bowl game, disappointment. The Oklahoma game, disappointment. The Vanderbilt game, disappointment. But there were some high moments as well, like when they beat LSU convincingly at their place. And, of course, the biggest win of the season, that one coming against Georgia there in the early part. So let's look at this year's schedule. It's a unique one, right? Alabama's win total this year is 9.5. That is at the high point for the SEC. You also have Texas as 9.5. You have Georgia that's at 9.5. So Vegas kind of looks at the SEC and the top tier of the SEC and kind of wondering who's going to get to double digits. Well, Alabama's schedule appears like it can get there. They'll start the season by going to Florida State. Anybody's guess as to what Florida State's going to be this year. I'd welcome any input you might have because I don't know. I think they got a chance to be decent, but Are they going to be anywhere near what they were 2 years ago? Probably not. That should be a game that Alabama wins. They have Louisiana Monroe in week 2. They have Wisconsin at home in week 3. I'd be surprised if Alabama doesn't start the season 3-0. Now we got to find 7 more wins for them to eclipse that 9.5 win total. At Georgia, extremely difficult game. You would imagine that Georgia will be up for that one. So I think that one we'll put in the toss-up category for the moment. Vanderbilt, that's one at home. I think Vanderbilt's probably a pretty good opponent, but I would imagine Bama will have that one circled, trying to exact some revenge after last year's disappointment. They'll go to Missouri on October 11th. Tough game for sure, but a game that you would hope that Alabama would travel and play well before traveling home to play Tennessee in the third Saturday in October at home, probably trying to exact some revenge there too. So I think Alabama will handle their business at home against Vanderbilt and Tennessee, at Georgia, at Missouri, 2 very tricky games. And then to round out the October schedule, that's at South Carolina, a team that I think's got a lot of promise, but a team that also has a few question marks coming into the season. We'll put that one in the toss-up category as well. Bama will finish the season by playing 3 of their final 4 at home against LSU, Oklahoma, and Eastern Illinois before they go on the road on November 29th at Auburn. So the home schedule, I think, is pretty manageable. You have Wisconsin, Vandy, Tennessee, LSU, Oklahoma, and Eastern Illinois. Those are games that can all be won by the Tide. Now, the road schedule, very tricky. I think Missouri's a big question mark. South Carolina's a big question mark. And frankly, I think Auburn is a huge question mark as well, knowing that they've improved in so many areas this past season and addressing concerns from the previous year. I think they've actually brought in premier talent kind of across the board. So you look at Bama trying to get to that 10-win plateau yet again. I like their chances. I really do. But it starts by being undefeated at home. And it also starts by making sure that they play up to their potential on the road, which they did not always do a year ago. I think if I had to pick, though, I think I'd take Bama on the over this year. I like what they have back. I like the continuity. And I think you might be kind of getting in on an underrated Alabama team going into the season, which is rare. That's seldom the case for the Crimson Tide. We'll go next to Texas A&M and head coach Mike Elko. Their over-under win total is at 8.5. They had 8 wins last year. And if you look at their schedule, there's a lot of things to like. There's 4 games you would think are winnable immediately. Before we even get started, I would expect A&M to win at home against UTSA, Utah State, Samford, and Mississippi State. With all due respect to Mississippi State, I don't know if the progress will be enough at this point to go on the road and win a game in the SEC. Look at the other games that they have on their schedule. At Notre Dame, incredibly difficult game on September 13th. Auburn at home, Florida at home. 2 games that I think you got to win. You got to hold serve at home before you go to Arkansas, to LSU, and to Missouri. Those 3 games are between October 18th and November 8th. 3 difficult road trips in a 4-week span will be challenging for the Texas A&M Aggies. They'll have South Carolina at home. I would imagine they'll have that one circled after the disappointment in Columbia last year before finishing up the regular season by traveling to Texas in what should be a great rivalry game. So you look at this schedule, I think there's a bunch of games that are very winnable. Auburn at home, Florida at home. Those games you have to take care of business. I think it's going to be hard to go up to Notre Dame and get a win. I think you can get Arkansas on the road as well. So I think you look at those, some of those home games, a couple gettable road games, A&M should be sitting pretty this year. And if they can continue to be as good on defense as I anticipate them being and make some progress offensively while staying healthy, I think A&M's one of those teams that not enough people are talking about going into this upcoming season. I think A&M Aggies have a chance to really threaten. I really believe this, really threaten in the SEC this year if they can stay healthy across the board. We'll go next to Mississippi State and Jeff Lebby, whose over-under win total is just at 3.5. They had just 2 wins last year, so it might seem, well, 3.5, they can get that. But to know that they only had 2 last year, including a loss to the non-conference to Toledo, it might be a little tougher than you might assume. But this was a team last year that was trying to figure themselves out. It was a complete shift in what they wanted to be from a philosophy standpoint. I think if Blake Shapen can stay healthy at quarterback, they should be in a really good spot. And you look at their non-conference, there should be 3 wins in the non-conference automatically. That's at Southern Miss, Alcorn State, and then against Northern Illinois. If they can get to 3-0 in the non-conference there, then take your pick. You got to make one upset. One upset happen. I frankly do not envision Mississippi State right now being able to go on the road and get an upset. I don't think that's likely to happen. But can they do it at home? Good luck against this schedule. You have Arizona State, who comes to town on September 6th. Arizona State is a playoff team from a year ago and returns a lot of their core from a year ago. You have Tennessee. That might be the most gettable opportunity because at this point, while I think Tennessee has a chance to be really solid, I don't think they'll be anywhere near as good as they were a year ago. So maybe that's the one that Mississippi State has to circle on September 27th to be able to get over that 3.5 win plateau, because their other home games are against Texas, Georgia, and Ole Miss. At this point, yes, there are questions surrounding Ole Miss. There are a few pieces that need to be replaced there, but I don't see a win against Texas and I don't see a win against Georgia, not at this point. So can they get Tennessee and can they get Ole Miss, or could they perhaps pull a big upset against the Big 12 favorite or one of the Big 12 favorites in Arizona State? That'll be the big question mark for Jeff Lebby here in year number 2. We'll move over to the ACC, where Bill O'Brien and Boston College are trying to improve on a 7-win season from a year ago. That was a rock-solid first season for Billy O. I think they got a chance to do it again this year, even though Vegas disagrees with me. 4.5 is the win total for Boston College, and I can kind of understand why. And when we get to teams like Boston College, we like to put games into categories of wins, toss-ups, and losses. All right? Wins, you got to beat Fordham, you got to win at Stanford, and you got to beat UConn. All right, those are the 3 you absolutely have to win if you're going to threaten to go over this win total. All right, your losses, because I think the schedule is pretty dang tough for Bill O'Brien and Boston College. Your losses are Clemson, at Louisville, Notre Dame, SMU, Georgia Tech, and at Syracuse. Now, could you potentially get Syracuse? Sure, but that would be a bonus, because these are the games that I'm kind of assuming, it's going to be hard for them to get those. So got 6 that are in the L category right now, but you got 3 that are in the win category. Here's your toss-ups: at Michigan State, at against Cal, and at Pittsburgh. In order to go over that win total, you got to win 2 of the 3. Can you do it? Sure. But 2 of those 3 are on the road, at Michigan State and at Pitt. And then Cal's a big question mark. That game will be at home on September 27th. So if Boston College is going to hit the over, like I said, you got to win 2 of those 3 against Michigan State, Cal, and against Pitt. We'll go next to Duke and Manny Diaz. One of the great stories of the college football season last year was Manny Diaz leading Duke to a 9-win first year. And in those 9 wins, 6 of those 9 wins came in one-score games. They were a remarkable 6-1 in one-score games last year. But there are pieces to replace and there are things to figure out. Their win total isn't too bad. They can certainly get there, but it'll be very, very difficult, I think, when looking at the entire picture. Elon, UConn, Virginia, and Wake Forest are the 4 that absolutely have to be won. If they're going to eclipse their win total and get anywhere near matching where they were last year, they have to win those 4 games. Then you have a bunch of toss-ups, because I only look at this schedule and I see only 2 losses right now. That's against Illinois on September 6th, and that's at Clemson on November 1st. So that means you got 2 losses, so 10 other games are up for grabs. You have 4 that we've already chronicled as W's: Elon, UConn, Wake Forest, and Virginia. All right, now here's your toss-ups. All right, you got to win a handful of these. At Tulane, I think Tulane, Darian Mensah, your quarterback who transferred from Tulane, he's now going back to New Orleans to take on the Green Wave. That's one where I'd give Duke a slight edge, but not a significant edge going into this season. You got NC State at home. You're at Syracuse. You're at Cal. You have Georgia Tech at home. And then you're at North Carolina. Anybody's guess as to what North Carolina might be this year, because I certainly am having a hard time figuring out what they might look like and what they could potentially accomplish. But it's anybody's guess. It's a rivalry game. It's on the road. So we'll put it in the toss-up category. So you got to win 4 of those games in order to get over that win total of 7.5 for the Duke Blue Devils. But either way, I think there's a lot of reason to believe that they can get those games, but they're going to have to play well on the road, because if you look at that toss-up categories, 4 of those 6 games are on the road, the 2 at home against NC State and against Georgia Tech. Both those teams, I think, have a chance to be improved from where they were a year ago. We'll go next to Fran Brown and Syracuse, who won a remarkable 10 games last year. Pretty insane record there for Fran Brown, and some notable games too. Wins against Miami, some notable performances, some great games throughout. There's only 2 guaranteed W's on the schedule, though, and that's against UConn, against Colgate. And you have to take care of business at home, because I'd be a little surprised if Syracuse goes on the road and gets a win this year. Because look at this road schedule: at Clemson, at SMU, at Georgia Tech, at Miami, and at Notre Dame. That's 5 very tricky road games against teams that I think have a chance to all win at least 8, maybe 9 games this upcoming season. So they got to take care of their toss-ups. I'll put Tennessee in the toss-up category for now because Tennessee's got some unknowns. Syracuse has some unknowns, and maybe one team is ahead of the other in week 1 when this game is kicked off in Atlanta on August 30th. So we'll put that game in the toss-up category. Even though I'd lean pretty heavily towards Tennessee, I'm still going to keep it in there because I think it is a game that Syracuse can win because there are enough question marks on their roster and on Tennessee's. Maybe they have a few things figured out earlier in the season, and they can pull off what would be a considerable week 1 upset. They have Duke at home, Pitt at home, North Carolina at home, and Boston College at home. I think you have to take care of business at home because if they can't win those games there in the Carrier Dome, it'll be extremely difficult for Syracuse to eclipse what they accomplished last year. So I think they can do it, but they got to go 3-2 in those toss-up games because, like I said, I think it's going to be tough sledding for Syracuse to go on the road and get some big wins. Moving next into the Big Ten, where Curt Cignetti and Indiana are trying to run it back. What was a great first year there in Bloomington. 11 wins in year 1. It's almost unthinkable to think about what the turnaround looked like last year. And with some of the pieces that need to be replaced, you replace a quarterback, you replace some key pieces on the defensive side. But for the most part, man, their core, there's a lot of really good players that will be back for Curt Cignetti and some key additions in the portal that could have them flirting with double-digit wins yet again. Vegas sits their over-under currently at 8.5. And part of that has to do with their non-conference schedule. They should be 3-0 in the non-conference. Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, and Indiana State should be 3-0 there. All right, you look at their other wins. I think they can get Michigan State at home, UCLA at home, and Purdue on the road. So now you're at 6 wins automatically before we get into the toss-ups and the L's. Because the L's, I think you're not going to win at Oregon, and I have a hard time envisioning them winning on the road at Penn State. So we'll put those in the L category for now, but here's your toss-ups, okay? You have to win 3 of these 4 toss-up games to get over that 8.5 win plateau. But I think they can be got for sure with Illinois at home and Wisconsin at home. I think you can get those games at home. Illinois is on September 20th. Wisconsin's on November 15th. Then you have to go on the road and win one of these 2. At Iowa on September 27th or at Maryland on November 1st. I think they can get either one of those 2. They might be able to get both as well. So it would not surprise me whatsoever if we fast forward to the end of the season and Indiana's sitting there 9-3, 10-2, 8-4 at the very worst. If they stay healthy, I think this could be a 10-2 football team yet again, because even their toss-up games and all 4 of those toss-up games, I'd probably lean towards the Hoosiers at the moment. Move next to Jonathan Smith and Michigan State. 5.5 wins is the total for this upcoming season. It was 5 wins last year, but they did eclipse their 4.5 win mark last year. So they overperformed based on Vegas, but they underperformed based on what the expectations might be coming into this season. Here's your wins: Western Michigan, Youngstown State, and UCLA. UCLA is at home on October 11th, so that would be one I would hope that Sparty would be able to handle. Here's your losses: at USC, at Nebraska. You might say, well, they can get Nebraska. Sure, they could, in which case we would take that Nebraska win and put it in the bonus category. They are now playing with house money, but at the moment here in the preseason, I would lean heavily in favor of the Huskers. They'll get Michigan at home and Penn State at home. I find it hard to believe that they'll get either one of those 2 games going into the season. So we got 4 in the L category, which means they have 3 wins, 4 L's. Here's your toss-ups. There's a handful of them: Boston College, at Indiana, at Minnesota, at Iowa, and then Maryland in Detroit. Now, I know that's considered a home game, but it's not going to be played in the friendly confines of East Lansing. So maybe Maryland travels there on holiday Thanksgiving weekend. But either way, knowing that 4 of your toss-up games will not be played in your home venue does make things incredibly difficult. But you got 3 wins. Tell me I got to find 3 more in the toss-up category. I think they can get there. Like I said, Boston College at Indiana. I think it's tough to go on the road and get it, but it's possible. Probably lean more towards Indiana there. Can you go to Minnesota and get it done? Perhaps, but it won't be easy. Can you get Iowa? Perhaps, but it won't be easy. And you got to get Maryland there in the regular season finale if you're going to get to the postseason, which is the goal for Jonathan Smith here in year number 2. Moving over to Sharon Moore and Michigan, and they finished with a flurry last year, and they have a bunch of games that I think they can stack as possible wins. Remember, they won 8 games last year, and not for the finish, it would have looked very, very different for Sharon Moore going into year number 2. This schedule, though, I think is a little bit more manageable than it was a year ago. You have a bunch of automatics. I think they have 7 wins that they already have on their roster right now. New Mexico, Central Michigan, Wisconsin at home, Washington at home, Purdue at home. They're at Northwestern. That game will be played in Wrigley Field, and they're at Maryland. So I think they should handle those 7 games. And they have 5 toss-ups. I really believe Michigan can win any of these games. Will it be tough? Sure. But all they have to do to eclipse that over-under win total is win 2 of the following 5 games. Can they win at Oklahoma? Sure. I think it'll be tough, but they definitely can. Can they win at Nebraska on September 20th? Sure. It'll be tough as well. At USC on October 11th, at Michigan State, which it's a rivalry game on the road. I know that Michigan State, that's one that they would love to get. Might be tough for them. But if Michigan can go on the road to Michigan State and get that game, it would get them much closer to that over-under win total and hopefully get into 9 regular season wins. And then shockingly enough, I'm going to put the Ohio State game into the toss-up category. Should I give that as a win because of how they've fared against the Buckeyes the last couple of years? Perhaps, but I can't. I think Ohio State on paper has a lot of answered questions this upcoming season, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if we're sitting there on November 29th at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and Michigan has won yet another one against the Buckeyes. It wouldn't shock me. It shouldn't shock anybody at this point with how they match up against the Buckeyes. So, can it be done? Sure, but it will be difficult. They got to win at least 2 of those toss-up games, and some of those toss-up games are pretty tricky. Finally, in the Big Ten, we'll move over to UCLA and Deshaun Foster. The win total is 5.5. They had 5 wins in Deshaun Foster's first season and pull off a couple pretty big upsets last year too. So it wouldn't surprise me if this team is more competitive than they were just a year ago. I think the schedule might be more difficult though going into this season. They'll have New Mexico and Northwestern. Those should be wins for UCLA this year. Then you have a handful of losses. Penn State, at Indiana, at Ohio State, and at USC. You're going to sit there, well, they can beat USC. Sure, they could. But right now here in the preseason, I would lean heavily towards the Trojans in that matchup. So we'll put that in the L category for now, which means they have to win 4 of these toss-up games. Utah at home on August 30th. That'll be the season opener. At UNLV, they should be able to get UNLV, but Dan Mullen and company going to be a very different outfit than they were just a year ago. That'll be week 2. They have to go at Michigan State on October 11th. They have Maryland at home. They have Nebraska at home. And they have Washington at home. Can they win 4 of those toss-up games? Because if they can, they'll get back to the postseason and they will cash in that over ticket on the win total. I told you UCLA was the last one. They're not the last one. We'll go next to Washington. Washington is the last Big Ten team. I should probably have known that, but sorry. Cranking down the list within the notes here, and I look at Washington, and I think they're a big question mark this year. Last year, there were some positives. First year, Jed Fish being there was some turnover. There were some challenges. There were some good things that were done by the Huskies last year. They found a quarterback of the future, and I think the upside with that quarterback, DeMond Williams, is actually quite high. You look at their win total, just 6 wins last year. Their over-under win total this year is 7.5. Can they get there? Let's find some W's first. Colorado State, UC Davis, and Purdue, all 3 of which are at home. All 3 must be won by the Huskies if they are going to get to 8 wins this season. You have L's against Ohio State, at Michigan, and against Oregon. I don't think right now those are games that can be won by the Washington Huskies. Like I said, if they win them, it's a bonus. But either way, I think those are 3 games you can count on a difficult performance. Now you have to find some toss-ups. They have to win 5 of these toss-up games to get to the over. At Washington State, a game that absolutely can be won, especially on the road. At Maryland on October 4th, they can get that one as well. But either way, long trip, difficult travel, and a Maryland team that will have some weapons there in early October. Rutgers at home, Illinois at home. Those will be 2 very physical games, a couple weeks apart. I think either one of those can potentially be won by Washington as well before they travel to Wisconsin on November 8th and they host UCLA on November 22nd. So it's going to be tough to get there. Like I said, 3 games that should be winners in Colorado State, UC Davis, and Purdue. Then you got to win 5 of the aforementioned 6 in the toss-up games I think that's going to be tough sledding. Should be very tough sledding there for the Washington Huskies. Moving next to the Big 12, where Brent Brennan and Arizona try to bounce back from a disappointing 4-win campaign just a year ago. Their over-under win total is sitting there at 5.5. I think they have 2 wins against Hawaii and against Weber State, but they have a handful of toss-up games and a few L's that I think are lying on the schedule. At Iowa State, against BYU, and at Arizona State. These are 3 games that I think will be very difficult for Arizona to actually go and get the W. But some toss-ups. They have a home matchup against Kansas State on September 12th. That's a Friday. That's early in the year. Maybe Kansas State at that point has not yet quite reached their potential, so I'll put that one in the toss-up category. Alongside Oklahoma State, also in the toss-up category, at Houston, at Colorado, Kansas at home, at Cincinnati, and against Baylor. Those games are all toss-ups. So if they're going to get 2 6 wins this year, and that's the goal, they have to win 4 of those 7 games that lie in the toss-up category. Can they do it? It'll be tough to envision. Not as many on the road. That does make it somewhat easier. Big question marks around Colorado, big question marks around Houston. And then you look at Baylor, Kansas, Oklahoma State, and Kansas State. I think all 4 teams have a chance to be improved this year. So it might be tough to get back to the postseason if you are Arizona and Brent Brennan. And finally, our last second-year coach in the Power 5 from this past season, it's Willie Fritz and the Houston Cougars. Their total last year, they won 4 games, 4-8 in the regular season. Their win total this year is 5.5. Can they get there? Should get W's against Stephen F. Austin and Rice there in the first 2 weeks of the season. You have some really tough games against 4 opponents in the Big 12, and Texas Tech at home, at Arizona State, TCU at home, and then at Baylor. Those are 4 games that I have a hard time envisioning Houston actually pulling off the upset. Now that takes us into the toss-up category. Remember, they got to win 4 of these toss-up games to get to the postseason and to cash that over ticket. Colorado is a Friday. That game's at home. At Oregon State, another big question, but a tough trip there for Houston. They're at Oklahoma State on October 11th. That'll be a tough trip as well. I think Oklahoma State has a chance to be very improved from this past season. Arizona, West Virginia are both at home on October 18th and November 1st, respectively. And then on November 7th, they travel to UCF. That's a Friday as well. Can they get there? It's tough. You got to win 4 of those 6 toss-up games for them to cash this over ticket. Man, at this point, it's hard for me to envision them being able to break through like that. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to encourage all of you to like, to rate, and to subscribe to the show. We appreciate all the support you've shown the show over the last few years. The numbers continue to go up, especially here in the summertime when things are slow. There's tons to talk about. There's tons to preview with excitement. Excitement creates momentum heading into the season this upcoming year. So for all of us here at ACF, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.